Welcome to our next episode of Interviewing the Experts. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Jonathan Moss. For those who don't know me, my name's Joel Kirkland. I'm Managing Director of Focus on Workday. I lead a global team of Workday recruitment experts. So, hi, Jonathan. Tell us a bit about yourself first off.
Hi, Jill. Nice to see you. And just to say, I've watched a lot of the podcasts that Focus Cloud produce, and I always learn a lot from it. So it's lovely to be invited. I started my career in electronics engineering, of all things, and then moved into IT. And since then, I've really specialised in leading, I suppose, large-scale change and transformation initiatives, hopefully with a decent track record of successfully recovering and initiating and delivering strategic global ERP programs. That's particularly in the finance, HR, payroll, and sales domains. I have expertise in migrating very heavily customized legacy systems into the cloud, with ERPs such as Workday, SAP, Oracle, Salesforce, etc. And I've got lots of battle scars, lessons learned, and experience of the change challenges, the complex data issues and integrations, local legal challenges, that the teams and myself would face through these initiatives. And on the point about the teams is I'm really used to building and leading very culturally diverse teams. And I've traveled and worked in USA, Europe, and Asia Pac. And that's what I enjoy most, not the travel, but working with colleagues who come from different cultures.
Sure.
You get to bond really very quickly, Joel, on very challenging nature of these delivery programs. I've also supported many organizations in writing business cases, running RFP processes for vendors and consulting firms. And I suppose finally, I shouldn't admit it, I've really learned not to be scared or fazed by complexity across the enterprise. When you go in, especially to more global organizations, I've got this expression that I'm professionally scared, but I don't show it. You've got to break the problem down. And though I'd never admit this in a pub with friends, I really like implementations that involve payroll, whether it be a payroll transformation or just integrate into payroll. It's very challenging. Things that we can talk about that a bit later. So I suppose that's a bit about me. And I live in North London. I've got one wife, 2 daughters, and a dog.
Okay, fabulous. All right, great intro. All right, so on that note then, around programs, so look, you get the call, it's myself or somebody calls you in and they say to you, Jonathan, we want you to do this piece of work, business case is all done, just want you to deliver. What questions do you ask?
Well, actually, let me take it back at one stage. It's when an agency calls me and says, they've got a client, they're desperate to start some work, they've signed off the business case, when can you start? Obviously, after interviews.
Sure.
So, I'll say to the agency, oh, great, they've got it signed off. Do you mind me asking, do you know who was involved in putting together the business case? And it could have been someone on the exec team. It could have been IT produced the business case. Oh, and this is an HR transformation program you're talking about. Yes, but IT tends to do those things for our clients. The red flags are already going up. No disrespect to IT, I came up through that route. Oh, great. And do you know from the client how quickly they want to implement? Yeah, absolutely. They've got to do it in 9 months. They've only got money for 9 months. I said, oh, great. And have they got a vendor? Have they chosen a system vendor? Well, they're thinking about SAP or Workday. They haven't finalised it yet. And I say, how about an SI partner? Because typically you would use one. Oh no, they thought you could, whoever gets the role will come in and help them choose it. 9 months? Blimey. It's going to take 4 or 5 months to do the contract negotiations. It will take months unless there's an amazing team already that sat there doing nothing for the client, an SI actually that has been onboarded, to actually mobilize. Really, this is where it comes down to the expectation management. Now, let's assume I'm asked to have an interview. Being really candid, it's quite hard for me to ask those questions because you want to come across, if they take you on board as a transformation lead, program director, whatever you want to call that role, what they're actually craving for is leadership and expertise.
Yep.
If I sat back and just said, I'm not going to ask these awkward questions, I'll just do it as a competency-based interview, and hopefully, he understands things technically, he knows what a RAID log is, we'll bring him on board. I don't think that's ethical. I don't think it shows my mettle. And I think it's incumbent to be on the interview, in my opinion, is a conversation. And if you're interviewed by particularly more senior people initially, being honest and saying, look, if you don't mind me saying, I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions, because that kind of guide, I can talk about my experience, but it'll guide the way we take this and also give you an understanding of the way I feel. Because if I did join you, I'd be asking these questions on day one. So let's have a chat now. So I am going to ask where they are on that journey around thoughts around vendor, and do they have a preferred SI partner? And often, we'll want to go with that particular consulting firm. And I say, can I just check on this? Do they do your audit as well? Their financial audit? Yes, they do. I said, well, probably there's a conflict of interest there, potentially. Yep. So it's these types of things that I've had to deal with. Another one is I'll always ask about what's your decommissioning strategy. Now, typically, I'm talking about much larger scale organizations, European implementations or more global ones, where you've got lots of disparate legacy systems, different parts of the different operating companies into the overall group, etc., etc. So there's a bit of naivety, I think. Often the business case is, Jonathan, we're going to save all this money decommissioning systems. Well, maybe if you're swapping, SAP Cloud for say Workday Cloud, or even the other way, you might have quite heavy licensing costs anyway. So actually, if you were changing from one to another, there's probably some reasonable parity. But if you're going from very old legacy finance, HR, sales systems that you're paying, £50,000 or $100,000 a year, and you're going to decommissioning, but you're going to spend 5, 10, whatever million on the implementation, decommissioning is not the answer to the business case. It'll add to it. I think there's a lot to get right when putting that business case together.
Sure.
And another thing that's missed, and it's something that I have learned myself, and I preach the hell out of it now. See, if you take what I would call a standard multi-geographic implementation, let's say you're thinking of going with Workday, for instance, you're going to lots of countries, different territories, definitely different statutory and legal laws, both on the employee side, labour laws, definitely on the financial side if you're putting in both those types of functionality. How do you know whether, for instance, Workday is a right fit for that locale? It probably is, but it's the bits that are integrations to third-party solutions, benefits, local tax authorities for invoicing through the government. How are you going to know what that is? Because that turns into additional time needed in the program or project plans, probably more sophisticated integrations from, say, Workday to those third-party solutions, etc.
Sure.
I'm therefore a real fan of something called a discovery exercise. Typically what organizations do, Joel, is they say, right, we're near to doing the deal with Workday. We probably believe this is about an 18-month program of work, not 9 months. And we think we're narrowing it down to these two SI partners. So let's take one and let's get them in. And this would be my advice. And my advice to them is, do not sign up for an 18-month program. Do not do the deal with them for that. Do the deal for a very time-boxed, say, 2-3 month discovery phase. You're going to pay a few $100,000 for that. That and the remit of that discovery phase ultimately is to inform where the risks are, the challenges, and ultimately where the SI thinks, is that 18 months viable, and what those costs are. That discovery phase really pulls out the risks around data. Are we going to be able to get data from that third-party finance vendor that you're migrating off of to use it to Workday Finance? That discovery phase is critical. It de-risks, it tells you what the likely costs are, which then go into the business case. So you've got a business case that you start to trust. And the other things, of course, I would go in and be asking questions around that informs the business case. To your earlier point, Joel, is do they know what their target operating model is, which could end up being, not always great for employees, an outsourced, offshore, shared service model globally, which ultimately feeds into the business case. But you also have to think about that when you're doing the design of the systems, when you do the security setups. What's the enterprise architecture landscape look like now? What's that as is? What's the strategy, the IT and architecture strategy? What's the to be, et cetera, et cetera. And the other thing is, is there going to be any reorg to the business in the next year and a half? Now, some of that's very sensitive. So I'm not particularly talking about mergers and acquisitions there. That tends to hit. No one will know about it. But if you know there's going to be a reorg, that's a nightmare for a program that's particularly trying to deliver HR across the globe, because it's all about orgs, supervisory orgs and org structures, and especially when you're doing things like position management and how are the roles defined, where do they sit in the organisation. You go through all that design, you lock down the security, all of a sudden there's an org change, and it's across the business. Yeah. So that's a long answer to your question, but ultimately all this informs the business case, and these are the types of questions I would be asking and want to get, and want the business, the sponsors, to understand as they start on the journey.
Got it. Okay, superb. So you alluded to this in your answer to the first question, managing expectations. What is your approach to this?
Good question. I live in the world of sales directors, HR directors, CPOs, finance directors, and of course the people that work in their teams. These senior people, unless they've been through a heavy change program before, material involvement, whether they've been sponsors, they will have had conversations with vendors and partners and this, that, and the other, and they'll get a view from these partners who I think it's a rose-tinted view. And what they won't understand is everything's about change. I want to talk about the burden of change on the people in the business who are going to have to be part of the delivery team, or at least supporting in some peripheral way. So I will talk to the HRDs, the FDs, CIOs, and actually then their teams, if you like, on what a typical implementation life cycle looks like. You're planning it, you go through design, customer confirmation sessions, playing it back. There's typically then a configuration of the build cycle. Now, you can do this in more of a parallel and agile way, but then you've got to go into testing, and ultimately then it's into cutover and go live. They need people from their, let's just say it's finance and a people stroke HR transformation. People from those functional areas and those teams have got to be involved in the program, and some of them almost full time. You're going to need some people to support you through the discovery phase, potentially with an SI partner where you just sign them up for that, say, 3 months before you then do the big deal. You're going to need people in design workshops. You're going to need the SMEs, the HR admins, the people who work in the talent acquisition teams, people who specialize in talent performance. Those the people and typically, of course, if it's a multi-region implementation, even if you're phasing it, you ought to have people from that country and that country and that country, part of global design before you then do the local design. So you're going to have SMEs as part of the design and the playback to sessions that the SI do to say, right, we listened to you in the design phase. This is what we heard. We've done a little bit of prototyping. This is what that, maybe that performance review process is, or that onboarding process looks like. Shoot it down now. Tell us what we missed, anything you didn't think about. So you can need people in that You're going to need people, of course, in then the test phase. Testing, and I'm not talking about the technical unit testing, I'm talking about, 2 to 3 months of end-to-end testing. You're going to need those HR SMEs from those teams actually supporting the test scenario and test script preparation, and then doing the testing and spending time testing rigorously.
Yep.
Some of them are going to have to help with data, bringing data out of legacy, helping to cleanse it, and then cut over to live. Very different if it's HR versus finance. Typically you freeze the system, the legacy system, just before go live, with a blackout period or whatever you want to call it. And then you're going to have to manually key in data. Go live, you might soft launches. The point is, there's a burden on existing people that in existing teams with the SMEs that you need. They don't have time for their day jobs and to work on the program.
Yep.
So typically, I'm setting those expectations up front with the FDs, the HRDs, CPO, etc., and say, right, have you budgeted for backfills? Because we are probably in each of those functional teams can either backfill for that person, backfill for that person. And by the way, payroll, we're ripping out the old HR systems. You're going from legacy to a new solution, one global source of truth of people data. If you've got to get one thing right on day one, it's payroll.
You mentioned vendor and SI. Let's talk about the relationships and what are the key considerations there?
Well, first of all, I think there's often a common misconception that the SI partner, you've chosen the vendor, again, let's just say Workday, and the SI partner is going to do all the work. They're going to take you through that methodology, that life cycle, and get it live. The SI is not, if you're in meetings and the only conversations you hear over an 18-month deployment is the SI is doing this and the SI has done that and the SI should have done this and we're supporting the SI. Forgive the cliche, the role of my type of role is to have one team. So yep. You stop thinking about it as the SI's name. It's just him or her in the team. They're responsible for that. They've been working on this. And that's true of the business. You need to have one team. So the SI partner, the word there is partner, partnership. Embed them in the team. We're all human beings. We're all doing this together. The SIs are totally dependent, Joel, on the business's availability to support the program, which comes back to my earlier piece.
Yep.
When you're actually doing the contract with the SI, I've called 2 or 3 things out. Sure, the SI, they're experts at facilitating workshops. Say, right, we're going to talk about the recruitment cycle. And let's see, we're going to show you what that cycle looks like. We're going to demo it. And now we want you, client, to tell us why that won't work for you in this country. So in the contract, the client will expect, they'll put things like, reviewing the process designs. The client's got to sign off the functional design, which means the client's got to have skin in the game. The client has to review that, be part of that process. So there's a lot of responsibility and accountability on the client. Testing, other than the technical unit testing, almost every contract I've seen, and I believe it's entirely right from an SI, is the client is going to do the testing. Sure, and raise the defects, and then the SI will fix them, and then the client has to retest them. There's a lot of testing and playback. The SIs will be expert at taking the data that the client's given them, there's a strong hint there, because that will be contractual, and helping to transform it and load it into the new solution. But it's the client's responsibility to cleanse the data. Ideally, you'd be giving the SI data that has been, it's accurate and complete. Most data isn't, of course. And then there's a key piece of work. The SI will expect, again, it's contractual, for the client to validate. Right, this is what came out. This is how it's been transformed and been put in the system. The SI will run validation reports. And it's up to the client then to do that comparison, because often things get missed, through no one's fault.
Yep.
But there's a lot of onus on the client to validate doing that. Another thing is integrations. So it's always fascinating to me that the clients tend to think the SI is going to do everything regarding integrations. They're going to make sure all the integrations work. They're going to deal with the third parties. Absolutely not. Most SIs they'd be willing to meet with that third party payroll provider or that third party ATS if you're not going to use the system's ATS for various reasons. The client owns the relationships. The client owns the contractual relationships. The client ought to not only introduce the SI, but frankly be in those meetings with the SI. So the point is, the onus is on the client, not the SI, to manage those relationships and support the SI. And a lot of that will go into the contract. So the SI will, it will help working with the client's IT departments, typically the architects and the third party that you're going to integrate to. They'll typically work the problem through and create that integration piece, but they will not be ultimately accountable for the testing of it, etc., etc. So that expectation management, I find explaining that, I don't do it all on day one,
of course,
because it's too scary. And one more thing, we talked to you, good question to talk about the SI and vendor. Now, if it's a cloud vendor, Joel, if you dumb it down, it's about them selling you some licenses. What I find is a really good investment, and this is another expectation I set, is you really want, so you've got a really good SI, you've got the client who's really bought into this, everyone wants to help. It's very good to have external QA. Now, that's not someone coming on board to say, right, you configured that wrongly, you've done that wrongly. It's take Workday, they have delivery assurance. Now, your pay could be £200,000 or £300,000 or dollars for that. But on a multi-million spend, it'd be very foolish not to listen to the vendor to have that QA, because ultimately you'll save money. So what it will typically do is connect you with experienced deployment and project management experts from that vendor or working with the vendor from a third party, and they will ensure the system is optimally configured. Now, you'd say, well, why aren't the SI doing that? The SI are very close to it. Even they would typically admit that if things were peer reviewed, maybe by someone who hasn't been so invested in the program or project, that would be very useful. So the vendor, delivery assurance and Workday, for instance, they'll work with the SIs to QA, look at the program and project plans, look at the functional configurations, at the final config, pre-cut over and live, etc. Just to say, well, actually, we noticed you've done that integration to that third party, maybe Payroll. Do you mind if we advise you actually there's potentially a better way of doing it based on what we saw with the different clients? You're investing in de-risking. So I think a decent vendor will either have that capability themselves, that QA and assurance, or they'll know someone who they would typically want to put in. So they're not trying to catch anyone out, the client or the SI, but I think it's a really good thing to do.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, really does. Okay, so in lots of our conversations, we talk about complexity and what did you describe yourself as professionally scared, right? So you love a challenge. Let's talk about when you are drafted onto a failing program or a program that's behind. What do you do in that scenario, Jonathan?
It's happened a lot of times.
Okay.
A lot of times I do full life cycle, but sometimes programs and projects go off the rails. They either completely gone off the rails and they've been stopped, need to be resurrected, or they've slightly gone off. They know they're going to have to delay by 6 months, and they need a fresh pair of eyes. I am professionally scared when I go in there. If I'm lucky enough to get the job, and what that means is don't panic. The thing I do not go into, I've got a number one rule, is don't go in and assume the worst about the people who've been working on the program.
Okay.
And don't blame. Don't blame when you go in and you see something that's wrong. Well, why the hell haven't they done this, that, and the other? They should have done that. You weren't there. You, me, I've made the mistakes before. It could not even be a mistake. It could have been there's been a complete new reorg. All right, so you've gone along. They've got 3 quarters away. They're 4 months from go live. All of a sudden, how they design things, or it was an M&A, a merger, divestment. These things can hit, so it's not really anybody's fault.
Yeah.
The question is, what do I do when I go in there? So I like to get a good sense of things, which typically takes me 4 to 6 weeks. I'd say in the last 4 or 5 places I've had to do this. So I'll obviously want the view from the sponsors. I want to go in and listen. I will ask some pointed questions, but I want to speak to the sponsors first. The sponsors aren't necessarily the execs either. So I want the people who really invest in the program that I'll talk to, the business. So if I go and speak to, not the delivery team, I always like to go and speak to the business. What do you feel? We've heard there are delays here. What's your sense of why? It'd be interesting what you get from that. Obviously, I'll then want to speak to the delivery team, and that would include it, not just the delivery team, people, maybe the finance and HR or sales that are involved in the delivery, also IT. I want to look at the governance setup. I'll definitely want the view from the SI partner, assuming there is. I'll want to get a sense of where the program is along its life cycle in design, testing, etc., and whether people feel they got out through that. And it comes out to governance. I mean, ineffective governance and program discipline, I think lack of governance or lack of the right governance is the killer to any program of change, frankly. It's back to project management 101, RAID logs.
Yep.
When I go in and I say, could someone just give me the RAID log? Can I just have a look at the risk issues and the mitigations? I would say 7 times out of 10 there isn't one, or there's some loose spreadsheet with 58 risks and no column for mitigations and status updates, etc. And I know it's boring with RAID logs. You know, people don't like these types of things unless you live in my world. Even I can make RAID logs sexy. I'm telling you, because when you go in and you do a workshop with the end client, you say, I've got a feeling we've got some challenges. You've intimated me. Can we just have an hour, or let me come over to Paris or whatever? Let's just brainstorm this, come up with mitigation. All of a sudden, you know, you've got a RAID log there. I wouldn't tend to call it that. Design authorities. Oh my God, the number of programs of work where you're going through functional designs, particularly when they're more multi-region, multi-site, global, where you're trying to standardize on one kind of global recruitment process, one talent process, because you want to the financial processes. You need those workflows and those additional approval steps baked into the process. You would typically have a design authority that says, right, these are the requirements that are coming out. These are the changes that Taiwan wants, that Connecticut needs in the USA, France wants. They've all got different requirements. You have a DA that's probably say chaired by the head of, let's say, HR ops, and that chairs that. You take the requirement, you debate it, and ultimately they make a decision. That's good governance. The other thing I look at, you know, how motivated is the team, and often they're demotivated because it's hard. They've got BAU jobs. There were no backfills. Come back to my earlier point, Joel. Often, though, there are key roles missing. The amount of time I said, right, let me go and have a chat with the PMO lead. Now, I know people, I hate project management office. It's terrible terminology. But most people understand what it is. They think the program lead is the PMO. Well, you need very strong PMO analysts, someone who's been there that knows how to support projects on the planning, on the risk management, dependency management. So often, either the person or people don't exist, or they're very inexperienced and they're not being given guidance. So often you don't have, for instance, a very experienced test lead. And I mean battle scarred from previous ERP implementations. And the test lead and his or her team isn't doing the testing. They're there supporting the business, driving those tests. driving the tests and chasing people when those tests haven't been completed? Do you have an enterprise architect in the team or you could work with? Those types of things. I'll tell you, I see quite a lot, and I'm going to be brutal about it. It's a completely bust relationship with IT.
Okay.
And that comes often back to the misunderstanding. IT think the business should have more skin in the game. The business thinks IT should be leading the project. IT, I'll always make sure that IT has real skin in the game. I have an IT lead, a project manager, an EA, et cetera, et cetera. The big lesson I've learned is the minute you start the program, get with legal and particularly their data privacy teams and start working the problem earlier. Yep. Because you're going to need data privacy assessments from each of the countries that you're deploying to. It's different in Germany as it is to China, as it is to the UK, etc. So it's all very complex, but it comes down to rigor, I think. Yep. So I look at all these things and I kind of try and bring it back and on a one-page summary say, I think covering ineffective governance, data and legacy systems is incomplete and inaccurate. This is the approach I think we need to take. And typically I would then be saying, you're probably going to bust your deadline. You're not going to hit the date. So what could we do approximately in that time? And let's take an MVP approach, that minimum viable product, a bit of an old-fashioned term. What would you allow us to get away with putting in? So classic example is, let's not waste time. You've got 7 payroll providers you need to integrate to in 7 countries. Let's do it manually. Press a button in the system, produce a payroll employee changes report, give it to the payroll provider. Might cost you a bit more, maybe some manual entry, but you can get it live. So those are the types of things and kind of approach I would take.
Good. All right. So lots of fabulous detail there. Any final thoughts or anything that we've missed, Jonathan?
I suppose 2 things. You're hearing from me, and most companies that go through these things realize there's a massive burden on the people who are, let me just say, on the delivery team. And the delivery team includes people in the business who've got BAU jobs.
Sure.
If you don't take that into consideration, if you don't bake into the plans time off, if you don't, as a leader of a team, and often I don't line manage people because I'm going in there on contract. If one doesn't consider the people, have a laugh. People are just going to say, I'm too stressed and I'm not going to be able to do this. You've somehow or other, there has to be that taking into account that this is hard for everyone. And even myself, take time off. I've done things like, it's 5 p.m. No more work. Or Friday morning, go for a run, go and be with your family or something. We'll catch up later on that day. Recognize that people are working so damn hard that they just need time off. And often people say, I'm going to take some holiday, Jonathan. I say, good for you. Just plan it well in advance. Now, it's a bit cliche, all of that, but I recognize how difficult it is. The other thing is, more practically, I suppose, expect complexity. Ensure you've really thought through the program and project plan. Complexity turns into additional time and things you won't know. Therefore, you need that contingency time. You need contingency budget. Assume there are going to be delays. Bake in that contingency. Put regular checkpoints in. All this is about rigor. The other thing is ensure complete transparency. Never lie. Never pull the wool over the eyes of a sponsor. First of all, it's not moral. Second of all, the sponsor's under pressure to support you. So if you're telling them stuff and they tell the CEO it's going to be live then and it isn't going to be, well, that's not going to help anybody. So complete transparency. You can do that by great face-to-face comms as well as status meetings and reports.
Sure.
Have the right leadership in the team. So you probably, someone who is the functional expert on finance generally or HR, who's got that good experience of those business processes, who can work with those local teams. a really good test lead, test manager, really good enterprise architects, a great PMO, etc., etc., and a very, very good and experienced change lead. Someone who's been through change before, understands that life cycle. I haven't talked about change much. So I think assume it's going to be complex, be rigorous, consider the human beings in this, and you have a chance of delivering it well.
Fantastic. Okay, so that has brought us to the end. A massive thank you, Jonathan, for all that detail and insight into big, complex programs and what it's really like.
It's been a pleasure. I probably ranted on a bit too much, but I'm very passionate about it.
Yep, I can tell. That's good stuff.
But thank you, Joel. It's been really pleased you asked me to do this. Thank you.